one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign in the midterms. That
here we go.
Well, if you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
Why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election to try to keep them?
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process, and I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign.
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
But your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on.
Well, that's true.
But
they weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. Right. These were people. This was an actual, you know, it happened a few days ago. And
they're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President, if I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I was
going
to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian investigation because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN.
Joining me now with reaction, conservative filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza and media reporter for The Hill, Joe Concha. So I just want to start off, before we get to the whole arm push, whether it was or whether it wasn't. This is the President of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief, and he can characterize something happening at our border however he wants. It's an invasion, it's an incursion, it's an intrusion. He has authority over the border when it comes to national security. Remember Barack Obama? In Benghazi, he said that terrorist attack was a protest over a video. Now, that was an extreme mischaracterization of the truth, and the media never challenged him on that at all. They let him slide on that. So to have Acosta come up over a difference of opinion, over a choice of words, and try to argue with the president in such a rude and disrespectful way, I thought was uncalled for. And just yanking the press pass is basically just saying, listen, Jim, get on the timeout, cool off for a second, and we'll let you back next week. Dinesh, what do you think?
Well, first of all, the exchange, this to me was highly entertaining. It reminded me of some of the skirmishes between Reagan and Sam Donaldson from the old days, except Reagan and Sam Donaldson were grown-ups. Now, the funny thing here, I think with Jim Acosta, I'd have to say, I'm looking at an overgrown infant. I don't know if this is medically possible that you physically grow, but emotionally you remain an infant, and intellectually, because when you're an emotional infant, you want to grab something, you don't want to stop, you don't know enough, you want another cookie, another piece of candy, and you won't take no for an answer. And the other thing is, you have a sense of entitlement and arrogance because you don't have...
He thinks he's above everybody else in that room. He thinks it's the Jim Acosta show, and he's there to trade barbs with the President of the United States. And if he gets called out for it, he's the victim. He thinks he's the Rosa Parks of the press corps, and he's too dramatic. I don't know Jim Acosta. I've never met him. He seems like a fine guy personally, but his behavior is totally out of line. And Joe, taking a press pass away isn't attacking the First Amendment. It's just telling the guy, hey, behave yourself and conduct yourself with a little bit more decorum and have a little bit more respect for the presidency.
I'm glad you played the entire clip because all I've seen is the microphone exchange. If you watch the clip, he tries to ask Acosta 4 different questions. The way a press conference like this works, if you're a White House correspondent, you get one question and maybe a follow-up, maybe a second question. As you said, it's not his show. There are dozens of other reporters in there. Good ones, by the way. John Carl, ABC, Jeff Mason, Reuters, John Roberts from Fox News, Hallie Jackson, NBC. They're not trying to ask 4 questions in this case. And remember the way Acosta started that. He says, I want to challenge you. And then he goes into a lecture around whether it's an invasion or not. This is a mid-40s version of the captain of the debate team. Right? And that's not.
And look how many
job.
questions the president took. He took 68 questions from 35 reporters. And Dinesh, Jim Acosta just wants to monopolize the whole thing. I think if you want to go up there and ask a question, fine. If you have a follow-up, see if you can squeeze it in. But to say to the commander-in-chief, you know what, I'm running the press conference. You don't get to decide when you want to move on to another reporter. I'm the one holding the mic. I get to decide when the President of the United States wants to move on to another reporter. Who does he think he is?
Well, I think what Trump finds maddening, and this explains the sharpness of the way Trump responded, is I think Trump recognizes that this same press corps, with Acosta in the lead perhaps, was just lapdog sycophantic to Obama.
Right.
And they are unremittingly hostile to Trump. Now, they have the right to do that, but to pretend that they're not doing that, to pretend that they're just being objective and, quote, doing their job, when the transparent bias, the agenda is so obvious to anyone watching, I think that's what Trump finds
They have
maddening.
no credibility because they treated both presidents totally differently. And then just lastly, real quick, I guess the White House is being accused of altering or doctoring that video or something like that. I don't know what they did or not. All I know is that if you look at it in real time, he has the mic in the one hand and he pulls his arm down on the woman's arm, and you can see it go down. So he's obviously provoking a physical confrontation.
I don't even think it's even the point, really, what happened with the microphone. This is 2 years of Acosta doing this. It is built to this crescendo. And let me go back to Neil Monroe. He was with the Daily Caller, and he interrupted President Obama in 2012. I asked your producers to put together a couple of headlines here as far as the reaction when he interrupted the president once. Politico, Obama interrupted by heckling reporter. Who is Neil Monroe, and why is he interrupting the president? The Atlantic. And finally, this is the best one from Mediaite. CNN White House reporter. Obama heckler let him sound passionate. That White House reporter wasn't Jim Acosta. I don't hear anybody calling Jim Acosta a heckler now.
One man's heckler is another man's hero. All right, guys.
Now, I'm a product of the Reagan years. I became a conservative in the 1980s. Why? Because I saw this character, Reagan, a genial, affable, self-deprecating guy, a guy with a wonderful and you may say collegial sense of humor. At one point, this was in the 1982 recession, Reagan was cornered by Sam Donaldson of ABC News. Some of you will be old enough to remember. Sam Donaldson was, you know, an adversary of Reagan. He was sort of the Wolf Blitzer of his day. And he goes, Mr. President, in this recession, you have blamed the media, and you have blamed the economists, and you have blamed the Democratic Party, but does any of the blame belong to you? And Reagan goes, well, yes, because for many years I used to be a Democrat. And I recall this episode now almost nostalgically because I remember even Sam Donaldson started laughing. There was a kind of reciprocity between the two men, and it was a time in American politics where you'd have Reagan over here, you'd have the Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, over here, and the two of them would fight it out on policy, but they could totally be envisioned having a Guinness afterward. In other words, there was an Irish camaraderie between them, and that was the America of then. But that is actually not the America of now. And part of what we have to think about isn't just how is it that we have all this craziness? I mean, Antifa patrolling the campuses, threats of violence, talk about kicking the opposition. Where does all this come from? What's really going on? What really seems to have happened at the beginning is people are looking at the same thing, but they are interpreting it in such different ways that you almost wonder if there are two different lenses in the camera. You saw this with the Kavanaugh hearings. You saw the same facts were put out there for everyone to see. There were no additional facts that one side had, the other side didn't. No, but nevertheless, two sets of people totally convinced that they're totally right. And you see this in media. If you're conservative and right-wing, you're watching Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, talk radio. If you're on the left, NPR. So suddenly you have different media being supplied to the two different sides. And I want to try to get into this and try to explain what's going on. What's changed in America? Well, one thing that's changed is that in the 80s, I think, by and large, the debate in American politics was not about goals. It was only about means. And what I mean by that is if Reagan stood up and said, I believe in an America that's strong. I want an America that is prosperous. I believe that technological capitalism creates the goose that lays the golden eggs. I want America to have influence all over the world, and I want America to be an example to the world. And I want people to look up to America, and I want America to be a magnet for all of humanity. I want the American recipe to be what everybody wants. And if this was the goal, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Democrat who really disagreed. Now, there were disagreements, but the disagreements over things like this. If America is prosperous, how should we split the pie? How should we divide up the golden eggs, if you will? Or if America is going to be an example to the world, should America do it alone, or America seek allies who can work together with us to achieve those goals? But the disagreement, as you can see, is over tactics and not over objectives. Today, the reason it's difficult to have bipartisanship, it's difficult to meet halfway, is it appears that the two sides want to go in opposite directions.